Hey, it's Guy from Off My Bridge, and today we launch into our How to Play series. And this series is going to be my suggestions for you on how to play the different types of officers that you get within Star Trek Adventures 2. This is because I have seen in the games that I have run, oftentimes folks really want to play Star Trek and they've watched lots of Star Trek episodes and they've really got into the fandom, but something that isn't explicit, especially for folks who haven't ever role-played within the Star Trek environment before, is what exactly you should be doing if you happen to be the chief helmsman or the head of medical. What are you supposed to do in downtime? Or, for that matter, what are you supposed to do in battle? Now, the book does give us a lot of advice on what should be done in battle in terms of orders and things, but I don't feel like that necessarily helps us go further. So, this series is about understanding what we need to do in each of the roles. This is broad strokes here, folks. Lots of big suggestions, so make sure before you take these to heart that you have run these past your GM first to say, hey, this is kind of the philosophy that I'm following. And remember, if you like what you are seeing here, hit that like button. It really helps me to understand that this is the kind of content that you're after. And of course, you can always hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel tremendously in all kinds of different ways. We are now dealing with the very first type of officer that you can be, which is the science officer. What can a science officer do? What should a science officer be doing? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that scientists should and shouldn't be doing. Key to the scientist, their mandate, if you will. If you are playing a scientific character, you should try to always make sure that your character understands what is going on in the current scene scientifically. If it's a dialogue between two species, how does a scientist understand scientifically what's going on? Well, by going and researching the species, by looking at cultural things, by trying to understand if there might be any significant atmospheric or planetary or environmental effects at play here. Looking into that kind of stuff will really help guide you and give your character a sense of purpose in these kinds of situations. So how do we do this? How do we understand scientifically what's going on? Well, here are a series of questions which I think you should be asking as often as you can to help guide you on how best to be a science officer. What is scientifically going on here? And what does it mean for me and my crew? Run a scan, use your tricorder. Is there anything going on? The answer might be nothing. The answer might simply be, no, this is just a good old Class M planet, and there's nothing wrong, there's nothing going on. In which case, your next question should be, is there anything unusual in the surrounding areas, scientifically speaking? Are there strange anomalies in the atmosphere? Are there strange anomalies outside of the starship? If everything is normal, that's absolutely great, that's fine. You don't necessarily have to have an answer for everything, but being aware of what's happening is super important for your specific job. If there is nothing going on externally in terms of scientific information, what can you scan to gain more scientific information? Again, your GM might say, well, everything appears normal. In which case then, you then ask the question, well, what can I research to further my understanding about the situation? It could be to research the species. It could be to research the region. Anything that you can think of that will help to further your understanding of the situation is important. Critically, you should never be trying to take charge of the situation. That's not your job. And as part of Starfleet, your responsibility is to have answers if there are questions asked, and to find those answers when those questions are asked. What is the decision as to what the crew are doing, as to what's going on? That's not your problem. You don't have to worry about it. So when you're sitting at the table going, oh, what should I be doing? What should I be doing? Understanding is what you should be doing. So some other questions that you could ask. What are the implications scientifically of this situation? Oh, I can see that one of the crewmen is starting to get quite frisky with one of the leptidarians. That could be something problematic because a leptidarian is a gaseous form creature and they are corporeal, and so there's some kind of thing. Oh, maybe this is going to be interesting to watch. Look at how you and what kind of questions you can ask to understand what's going on. Finally, when you do get something out of the ordinary, oh, there's a waveguide fluctuation in the gravimetric sensors. Now you have something to work with. Now you should start digging into it. What has caused that? How has it formed? What are the implications of its existence? Where did it come from? When did it start? And what are its likely impacts on the future? Is it stable? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? That is when you get into the meat of being the scientist. And you don't stop asking questions until you have answers. And in Star Trek, there are just dozens of scans that you can do. Oh, we've run a multispectral scan. We've run a subspace scan. We've run a tetryon beam over it to scan for subspace distortions. We've run a tachyon scan to see if anything's cloaked. We've run a this, we've run a that. It doesn't matter what terms you're using. You should just be letting the GM know that you are trying to run every scan that you can think of, regardless of the name, to identify what this thing is. And remember, you can scan it, you can touch it, you can observe it, you can taste it, you can subject it to different things, stimuli, all those kinds of wonderful things. That's really where the scientist gets their meat and potatoes, if you will, of their operations. So what can you do as the science officer when perhaps it's a bit of downtime or there isn't anything out there? It's just wide open space, Captain. There are so many things that you can do. Run some research experiments. Have a little backstory where you're secretly growing amoeba to try and form little colonies to run social experiments. Perhaps you are trying to open up a tear in photonic space. Perhaps you are trying to simulate a subspace inversion wave in the... you can run any kind of scientific experiment you like. Try not to have it have any kind of major apparent value. This is just something that your scientist is interested in. And this helps promote character growth and drive character growth. Of course, you can always be scanning, you can be monitoring, you can be reviewing, you can be writing a paper on a scientific discovery that you've had or on a theorem that you've had. You can go to town on deep diving into all of the cool stuff that you are, as a scientist, developing. So science is really, really fun. What happens in combat? Well, the science station has got quite a few commands which you can issue during a combat situation. Most importantly, I find anyway, calibrate sensors is super important. It is a minor action. It's something that you want to do. It's just going to help you moving forward. It's almost like a go-to giveaway kind of minor action. As a major action, science is limited. Very, very, very limited. Science basically has scan for weakness under most circumstances. There might be some cloak chips and things, in which case there's other bits to do, but primarily it's scan for weakness to give tactical officers an advantage in their combat. Everything else is kind of very situational or meh. That means you've got create trait and assist as your other two options. Never be afraid to take the assist major action. Being able to roll on somebody else's roll is really useful. That's potentially 2 additional successes where they might be needed most. It's also a really good way of generating extra momentum in the situation that you need momentum. When it comes to creating traits, that's when you as a scientist can get really creative. And this is something that I allow my own players to do. You must speak to your GM about this. When it comes to creating traits, you can do things that last, I always say, until your next turn. And they only cost 1 momentum rather than the 2 momentum, because they only last until your next turn. Creating them that last longer for the entire duration of the battle, I feel, might be a little bit of overkill. And also it's like, well, is that really what you're going to be doing? If you do want that, then it's 2 momentum as usual, and then it would last until the end of the scene. So what are some of the traits that I suggest you think about creating? And again, consult with your GM. Straight off the bat, sensor echoes. Sensor echoes is something that Star Trek has used many times. And all that sensor echoes should be doing is increasing the difficulty number for the enemy ship's weapons when they attack you. Because you're creating echoes of the ship. Actually, we're here, we're actually not there, we're over there. We're throwing various bits of radiation to make the ship look like it's over there, but it's actually over here. It's a wonderful little trait to create sensor echoes. The enemy doesn't know exactly where you are. Jamming. Jamming is something that isn't really looked at too much in the book. Jamming would be something that prevents the enemy from communicating with allies. Now, this is a very rare kind of situation, but it's also very Star Trek in terms of what enemies do to the Federation on a regular basis. However, if you know that the enemy have reinforcements at the edge of the system or in a nearby system, running some kind of jamming frequencies to interrupt, I think not only is smart play from a role-playing perspective, but from a tactical perspective, the GM then can't spend threat to bring in ally starships whilst this jamming is in place. And I think that that would be a fair call to make. These are my thoughts on how to play a science officer. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did I leave out? What could you add? What could we grow on this idea in terms of creating great science officer characters that have got things to do? What questions do you ask? Do you have a list of questions when you arrive in a situation as a science officer? Leave them in the comments down below. It would be awesome to be able to read them and learn from them and grow from them as well. Until next week, a huge thank you to my wonderful patrons, whom this month are getting an adventure. I can't yet reveal what the adventure is, but it's a cool adventure that you can throw in if your campaign is set anywhere after 2380. But I think it's fun. Anyway, until next week, I wish you long life and happy gaming.